And hello. Welcome to Reading the Receipts. We're on part 5. What a week. Where we are going through all of the receipts from Justin Baldoni, kind of just seeing his version of events. Does it line up with what we already know, verifying the information in it, and examining it, cross-referencing it with the other documents. Keep getting told that I haven't read the documents, so we put forward this entire series to kind of show that, yes, we have in fact read the documents. So tonight we're going to do a bit of a mixed bag. We got a bunch of different topics to cover. We might run a little longer than the other episodes tonight, so just letting you know because there's a lot of ground. So I'll get right into our disclaimer. So tonight we're going to look at some legal documents. I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not your lawyer. This is not legal advice. The allegations that we're going to cover in these documents are exactly that. They're just allegations. Nothing has been proven in a court of law. Nothing we talk about should be taken as fact. This is all just opinion provided for you for entertainment purposes only. So I want to make that very clear. You've gone above and beyond to also wade through his website. Yeah, it's been one of those. Did I read the Stephanie Jones lawsuit? Yes, throughout the other parts we have cross-referenced bits and pieces from Stephanie Jones's lawsuit. It's been kind of helpful in backing up some of the pieces, especially about the smear campaign, and I think it was also used on Monday's episode about the social media manipulation. So I think we used it Monday, Wednesday, parts 1 and 3. And I think we might have used it last night as well, a little bit. One thing before we get started into the docs themselves, I did say that tonight I'm going to be throwing out 5 free memberships to the channel at some point when we get into the Q&A section, so definitely stick around for that. If you want to kind of take advantage of that, I'm going to put a link in chat. It is a link so that you can turn on gifts on your account and get gifts from the channel. You need to make sure that setting is on so that you can get that membership. If you don't switch it on, if you end up getting membership, it'll pop up and say, hey, turn on gifts. You'll need to do that. I just read that sometimes if you're not quick enough about turning that on, then you won't get the membership. So definitely go ahead and do it. I'll remind you again before we actually do the gifting of the memberships, but get that out of the way. Okay. All right, happy Friday and pie. Yes, it's pie day as well. So, happy pie day to all of you who indulge. I already indulge in way too much pie, pizza and dessert. So that was not on the menu for tonight. All right, so the first thing I want to jump into tonight is a comment that we got on part 4 from last night. Sylvain had said that they missed the beginning of the live and caught it, and they didn't know about the previous movie and about the history with the lawsuit with Travis Flores. So the first thing I want to kind of do tonight is to jump into that, because I kind of made the mistake of thinking everybody else is like me and has been spending, the last 3 months, this being their hyperfixation and soaking up every piece of news. Some people may not have got up to speed. So I want to start out by showing, I'd also got a question from somebody saying, well, he doesn't have any history of this. I want to start out by showing there is actually a documented history of this kind of exploitative and performative behavior. And just kind of draw attention to that before we get started into the rest of the stuff. All right, so the LA Times, I think last week, put out this news story where when you read the lawsuits, there's a discussion between Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel where they're talking about the LA Times had reached out to Justin's former assistant. It looks like that's when they started working on this at some point last year, in the middle of last year. They've been working on this article for a while and only just pushed it out. But in it, they talk about Travis Flores. Like we talked about last night, he had cystic fibrosis. He'd, was one of the rare patients who ended up getting a 3rd lung transplant, but he was working on a script about cystic fibrosis in the story, and he wrote a screenplay called 3 Feet Distant. Now he worked with Justin. Justin had reached out to him to work on this his My Last Days show, where he kind of showcased people with terminal illnesses, and was going to feature Travis Flores. Travis knew that Baldoni had already started working on another film, 5 Feet Apart, and so he knew to kind of keep his screenplay from him. And it talks in the article here, that he knew to keep it away from him because he knew that we wanted to make sure that there wasn't copyright infringement. But what happened is He did send that script to other people. Justin Baldoni's team, or Wayfarer, ended up hiring one of the people who had seen Flores' script, and there were a number of remarkable similarities between the two, so much that in 2021, Travis sued Justin and Wayfarer and other individuals for copyright infringement of trying, to copyright stealing elements of his screenplay. You'll notice a familiar name here, Brian Friedman. Travis Flores at the time was represented by Brian Friedman, who is now Justin Baldoni's lawyer in his lawsuit against Blake Lively. This is where I think they first ever met, was as a result of this. Now, a lot of people, when they bring this up, point out that that suit was dismissed. It wasn't dismissed, it was settled. They'd reached a settlement in 2022, and it was dismissed as a result of that settlement. But I bring all this up because the LA Times article pointed out that they have talked to members of the family and, got the story about it. And they talk about how, according to multiple sources, Flores dropped the case after being advised by his legal team, by Friedman, who now represents Baldoni, that Baldoni had the financial resources to sustain a prolonged legal fight and that continuing the lawsuit would take a toll on his health. Essentially, he was struggling with that third lung transplant and trying to recover from it, and, knew that he couldn't cope with it, of doing this lawsuit, investing all of this money and trying to fight somebody who was backed by a billionaire, right? They said, look, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And so that's ultimately why that got dismissed. As part of that, though, this has been brought up and they've talked to Friedman about it. And Friedman has said that, it was as a result of that case that he learned what a good guy Justin was. And that's why he's representing him now. And they got the quote saying, over the years, I've learned what great people Justin and Wayfarer are. The Flores case was resolved without any determination of liability. And since then, it's been further confirmed to me that Justin and Wayfarer are exceedingly honorable and highly ethical. What they don't point out and discuss as part of this is that isn't the perspective of Travis Flores' family, who, are still grieving their son, but have never gotten answers from either Justin Baldoni or Wayfarer. Tim Flores in particular posted regularly on Facebook about it. He has been in Justin Baldoni's comments in Facebook about it, and talking about, Justin Baldoni made millions from this movie, and Travis never got any recognition for the screenplay. They've never got answers about how much of that screenplay was involved, had they ever seen it. They refused to even talk to Travis's family. And I don't know, that just doesn't sit right with me. If you knew that a grieving family that you'd worked with, especially a family that you had featured on your TV show, or not your TV show, sorry, your series, because I think it started as a web series. I don't know if he was part of the first or second season that was on TV, I think on the CW. But you have made a lot of money from this. It raised your star. It raised, Wayfarers. They've got a great deal of exposure and publicity and a lot of goodwill out of that series. You have a family that you featured who just you're not even talking to and not giving answers to. Doesn't sit right with me. Tim has talked openly as well about how he doesn't want any money, really. He just wants recognition for Travis's work. And like I said, he's also in Baldoni's comments a lot of the time. You can see here, it notes him as a top fan, right? So like he's constantly on Baldoni's page and, very clearly very upset about not having those answers. And I think for somebody who, talks about being an ally and makes a big deal out of showcasing these good causes and being an advocate, that he's left them without answers and refuses to even talk to them, it doesn't sit well with me. It's not just Travis's family as well. Others of Travis's friends have called out Justin Baldoni as well. This is from an individual who worked with Travis on his book, The Spider Who Never Gave Up. And they also were openly calling out Justin Baldoni back in, a few months ago, back in January, as all of this has kind of hit the news. They're kind of, also talking about their experiences and, that he kind of has exploited the struggles of others for his own benefit without really taking care of the people that got him where he is. Why I find it particularly offensive as well is back in 2019, when Justin was going to feature him feature Travis on My Last Days. Travis, did this interview with Access Hollywood, Access Live program, and they surprised Travis with this message from Justin, where Justin's talking about he's on a boat, and Travis, I got to meet him. He's this superhero, and then in the middle of that, Justin talks about, hey, what isn't talked about with terminal illnesses is the financial struggle and hardship that it puts on families, and then puts in a plug basically for Travis's GoFundMe, and is like, hey, go help him to raise money. Again, right? This is how he was talking in 2019. A couple of years later, Travis has to drop his lawsuit against Baldoni because he knows he doesn't have the financial resources to take him on. It just doesn't sit particularly well, and it kind of shows a little bit of that history. It's not just Travis as well. Back when all of this came out, I think, last year, in August, when there was a lot of like the leaks about, Baldoni had created this difficult atmosphere, then people felt uncomfortable on set. A friend of Justin's, Shabnam Moharabi, and I'm probably going to undersell her resume, so I apologize, but entrepreneur, author, keynote speaker, also of the Baha'i faith, talked about her relationship with Justin, and that she's known him for years, and that he's always been like a good guy. I've always kind of seen the best of Justin. In response to that post that she posted to Instagram, she got a reply from Cody Williams-Smith, who is a cinematographer that worked with Justin on that My Last Days series. Cody had a different experience. He said, working with Justin was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my entire film career. I watched him firsthand exploit the stories of people with terminal illnesses for personal gain. On that particular project, he treated the crew like trash. I honestly have a hard time thinking of someone I've met who has been more disingenuous. I don't think I've ever met someone before or since who was capable of saying thank you, and also simultaneously telegraphing to you that he did not mean it. It's been a decade or so, but yeah, he's been like this for a while, and it doesn't surprise me at all that the entire cast of the film is saying this about him. Maybe this is the wake-up call he needs. So, there's plenty of people in the past that have kind of seen him performing this way. Now, again, not to try and point this out to say, therefore, that means, anything. It is more, I don't think a lot of people know the history, and I think they've done a very good job of making it seem like this has come out of absolutely nowhere. One of the other things that kind of happened as well at the same time, I think in 2021, and Nolia kind of pointed out this to me as well on Threads, that there's a whole section in Justin's book where he talks about a wedding in Nashville, where his friend Kay, who is a black woman and the only black guest at this wedding, the guests were given bags of fresh cotton to toss in the air like confetti, and that Kay, this was a painful symbol and like very uncomfortable for her and an issue. Let me just bring up the pages from his book. So I went and grabbed, those pages from his book. So he talks about this story. She was the group. She was the only black woman in the group. She was the only black person at the wedding, and they were throwing cotton. She obviously felt uncomfortable at it, and when he talks about when Kay shared her raw feelings, we as a group downplayed the whole situation, downplayed her feelings. We bypassed her pain and came to the defense of the couple, imploring her to know that they were good people and it was nothing to do with race. She felt abandoned, and that she felt that she didn't feel seen by us. I responded to Kay's pain by telling her that when I look at her, I don't see a black woman. I just see my friend. I don't see color. I see heart. In other words, he made her point. Now he talks about, Kay kind of then responded by sending the group an email, saying that, this was some messed up stuff. I realized my dear friends who aspire to unity in a diverse global society had no idea what my pain looked like. I was shaking and I was on the same couch as you and you didn't see me. Baldoni says, I wish I could say that email had flipped a switch, but he didn't. He said, I'm profoundly embarrassed by what happened next. Instead of calling her immediately, my wife and I, in our confusion and privilege, flipped the narrative, centered our own emotions, and in many ways turned our privilege into victimhood, feeling like we were the ones who were irrationally attacked and that she was blowing things out of proportion. Now, he says that over this next 6 years, he would learn and sort of kind of unpack this experience. And he says that it's basically the George Floyd murder that really kind of opens his experience to it and makes him realize and see that perspective. And he then talks about, you know, it was so opening that he and his wife wanted to call Kay to apologize for us, to see how wrong we were, and you know how kind her email had been, and that they had blown it. And so he talks about how, you know, they went to talk to her, and that was really like an expensive moment for him, and that they apologized, and you know, we both finally chose to educate ourselves and begin to unlearn and relearn all we knew. I knew how problematic my behavior was when I told her I don't see color. I promised her that I would do everything I could to educate myself and my family and those uncomfortable conversations with fellow white people, as the burden shouldn't be on her and other black folks to educate white people. Like, you know, not a great beginning, obviously, to have that, but also that, hey, open to the experience. It's regrettable that, you know, he didn't listen to the email, but at least, you know, he's kind of showing that he's learning and growing it and learning from that mistake. The issue is that, let me go back to the New York Times, to the LA Times article, is that although he says this, here we go. Wayfarer then gets sued between 2020 and 2021 for racial discrimination by a Wayfarer executive. He filed a lawsuit alleging that he was, you know, told in the hiring process. Well, let me go to his lawsuit. Let me go bring that up. We'll go take it directly from him. So yeah, so he sued Wayfarer for discrimination, retaliation for bringing up complaints of a hostile work environment. You know, essentially the same thing that he's being sued for now in a different sense. So he talks about that when he was hired, and Sarowitz, Steve Sarowitz, we talked about, is the co-founder of Wayfarer, the billionaire investor as well. Sarowitz told the plaintiff that Wayfarer's next phase, you know, was for his life, was for meaning and purpose. And then he sold him, where is it? He told plaintiff, "We need somebody here who looks like you." Not a great start. He then talks about how, you know, during 2020, right, during the whole conversations that I think a lot of workplaces and a lot of people were having over the racial tensions and sort of that unchecked privilege that kind of raised, plaintiff made complaints to, about the CFO, Brian Singer, that we talked about with, you know, I think Wednesday or Thursday, the No More organization, right? The CFO of Wayfarer, Brian Singer, who's also on the board of No More, which is the domestic violence awareness group that Wayfarer decided to donate at 1% of the profits of It Ends With Us to. So Brian Singer, you know, he kind of made complaints saying that Brian Singer was being a bit tone deaf in them. Singer had previously told the plaintiff that it was very clear to him how white Wayfarer was and how different the plaintiff was from everyone else. Obviously, context in those kind of conversations matters, but, you know, it definitely feels like they were making note of, and you know, the plaintiff felt uncomfortable by being singled out and being told that they were different. They've made repeated complaints about it. You know, he talked about how he felt treated differently by his co-workers because of his race. When plaintiff brought up the racial inequities that are forefront of the national conversation at that time, Ms. Proctor acknowledged and agreed with plaintiff's concerns, but assured plaintiff that things would improve through personnel changes they were going to make. It looks like he then made a personal post to his Instagram talking about the conversation of racism and maybe reflecting on how some people haven't unpacked it. Another manager took a screenshot of it, sent it to Mr. Singer, insinuating that plaintiff believed Singer was racist, even though the Instagram post was not directed at him. So it seemed like it was very clear they weren't really listening or hearing that tension and maybe that lack of understanding each other's perspective in there. He also then talks about how on the Man Enough program, and this particular copy of this was provided to me by somebody else. So thank you for the person that provided me. And they've redacted this person's name because we don't want to get them in here. But they are a high profile they're a high-profile black man who was on a major show. They were going to be interviewed on Men Enough. Miss Politis had suggested branding the show with rainbows and having the person discuss racial issues, which was not the original topic presented to them when they had agreed. The meeting became heated when plaintiff told Miss Politis that he felt it was exploitative to use the rainbow and force the guest to discuss racial issues simply because he was a black gay man. And again, he got kind of dismissed and pushed out by this. Yeah. So, you know, again, this is another lawsuit that they end up settling, and it gets dismissed. So I kind of bring that up to just kind of show, like, there is this kind of history of this unsafe work environment, of unethical behavior with the people they work with, and, you know, a lot of complaints. Now, you know, they were both settled. There's no appropriation of blame or guilt in either of those cases, so I want to make that clear. But it's clear that people have had issues before enough to raise lawsuits. And also, those lawsuits, in the case of the racial discrimination claim, came after a number of complaints, right? And very similar to Blake Lively, where, you know, these complaints were raised numerous times on the set of It Ends With Us before coming to a lawsuit. All right, so one of the big topics I wanted to talk about tonight, that we're going to go through this mixed bag, is the WGA strike. While It Ends With Us was filming, the writers' strike, the writers' union was on strike. When they broke and shut down filming in June, because they were unable to get around the pickets and they had the shooting being disrupted, Justin returns to the Man Enough podcast in a episode on September the 26th. And I want to call out here, Marita La Laguna kind of tipped me off to this and you know, sent me this. But in that podcast, they, you know, talk about Justin returning, and, you know, Jamie Heath here is talking about, hey, so we're in the middle of a strike, and Justin, you've of course been absent because you've been standing in solidarity with the unions. And Justin says, yeah, you know, I wanted to make sure that it was completely okay for me to return to the podcast. And they found that it was, and then, you know, he returns to the podcast in September. That, you know, this is when I believe the SAG strike is going on, where they have joined with WGA in the strike. So, you know, making a very public show that we stand with unions, we support unions. Let me go to his timeline. Sure. Oh, I think I closed his timeline. Closed all the PDF documents. One moment, let's bring up the timeline. So they talk about this in the timeline when they get picketed. I think it's around page 40. It's a little before there, right? Because it's June 5th. I think here is where they talk about it. So on June 5th, the WGA picketers arrived to the filming of It Ends With Us, forcing production to act quickly to keep on filming schedule in response to the advisor solution to shoot on a boat, far from the sound of the picketers' horns. But after rehearsing a suit, they were about to leave the dock. Picketers then arrive, and at that point, Lively wouldn't cross the picket line, so we called lunch. Despite being obligated by her union to continue shooting, Lively refused to do so, and they point out that according to SAG-AFTRA rules at that time, SAG's position was that although the writers were on strike, they don't have, they had a clause saying that anybody who had already kind of contracted to do a production, they were okay to fulfill their obligations, even though it may be a struck work as far as the WGA were concerned. And so, you know, Wayfarer here pointing out that basically there was nothing in SAG's rules preventing Lively from crossing the WGA picket lines and showing solidarity for the writers' union. In fact, they were like upset that she was and were trying to force her because it was causing a delay to shooting and production. Now, they call out here specifically Lively, but Lively was not the only person who refused to cross picket lines. Deadline kind of did a story on June 6th. Oh, no, wrong one. Yeah, I guess it was June 13th. I thought it was June 6th. They did a story on June 13th, my bad, But they talk about the fact that that It Ends With Us was picketed on Monday. Now, they say that there is a case to be made that because Wayfarer is co-financing the studio, that they are following WGA guidelines. Essentially, the argument is the way that they made this film. Wayfarer was making the film, and they had basically sold, quote unquote, a film, right? Just some sort of package to Sony, who were going to pick it up. It's called a negative pickup deal. They sell the movie to them, and they're like essentially pre-agreeing to buy whatever movie. But Wayfarer was saying, well, hey, because it's us making it, it's not Sony making it. We're an indie studio. We don't count. We're not part of the WGA strike of struck works. But they talk about here on the day it shut down, they were supposed to shoot at a park in Jersey City. The picketing led to an attempt to shoot the scene with a paddle boat. So yeah. So they talk then about, Teamsters refused to cross the picket line, as did the IATSE crew members as well. So it wasn't just Lively, the crew and the Teamsters wouldn't cross the line either. So basically what happens is they get picketed, they shut down they can't film at the park. And it says there was a brief meeting with the crew outside of the location where they were asked to go to the base camp. So then they go back to the base camp to go kind of, reorganize and figure out what they're going to do, because their plan for shooting in the park is gone. While en route, the crew members got a text asking them if they're ready to work under any circumstances. So while Jamie Heath and Justin Baldoni are on Man Enough talking about how they have complete solidarity for the unions and we want to support all of this stuff, what we're seeing from their documents is they were trying to pressure Blake Lively to cross picket lines. They were trying to coerce their crew members into crossing picket lines because they really didn't want to have to do the extra cost of having to work around the strike. The majority were not willing to cross a picket line, and at the in-person meeting, they told the production that shut down for the day. So they, tried to shoot at the boathouse instead. They still got picketed. They called everybody together and said, hey, would you be willing? And nobody said they were. So they had to shut down for the day. This is, like I say, so this is June 5th, right here on that Monday. They're able to shoot, I think it says like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they get shut down. I think, or it might be the other way around. There we go. We're told the film did shoot last Wednesday through Friday. So Tuesday also they got, so Tuesday there, the 6th, they also had issues. I think it might even call it out here. It says, yeah, canceled call day. Daily hires got paid for an 8-hour day. So they canceled it on the 6th. It says they also canceled then again on the 12th. The picketers were there and the crew returned to work. Tuesday was the 13th was a down day. And so you go to Baldoni's timeline, they talk about this, and then they talk about how on the 14th of June, they send out an email saying, hey, we're temporarily shutting down production. We've lost too many days to picketing. We'll put a pause on it. We'll come back when the strike's over. It'll get released, it'll get finished. Don't worry about it. We'll continue afterwards. Now, at this point, they say that the film was temporarily halted due to WGA picketing. The next day, the production was notified that the WGA had agreed not to picket their set, allowing filming to continue. Now, we have now seen what the WGA said and whether they gave them an exception to be able to allow to film. I don't think them getting an exception that they wouldn't picket is the same. I don't know enough. But what I can tell you is that Deadline reported on the 16th that Wayfarer had failed in their kind of argument to the WGA to say that we shouldn't be picketed because we're an indie film. The reason is that the WGA said basically because you're being financed by Sony, because Sony are buying your film, you don't count as an indie film. And so they kind of reported on that decision, and then also of the public announcement by Wayfarer to shut down, citing the email due to the ongoing strike. Everybody's get beer back, and they talk about the crew were getting their gear back. So it does seem pretty permanent, at least until the strike ends and the riders go on. So nowhere does Wayfarer ever issue a public statement saying that they had resumed production. They seem to do it on the DL. And Lively, when they shut down, goes to London. And they make a big song and dance about, hey, you know, we've tried to reach out to Blake, but she's gone to London. She's not going to be shooting. She's going to plan on staying there. So now they quickly rework the schedule and continue to film from the 15th onwards. And they instead shoot with the young actors instead. And I can confirm that because there was a Blake Lively fan account that posted to Twitter about when they were filming here on the 23rd in New Jersey. You can see they're taking pictures there with Isabel Ferrer. They also then, you know, showed some video of the scenes that were being filmed there at this time. And it looks like from this with the ambulance and there's like a stretcher being wheeled out. This is basically the scene where Lily and young Atlas have their intimate moment. Atlas is discovered in Lily's room by her father. He beats the living heck out of him and he is hospitalized and wheeled out in an ambulance. So it looks like they filmed a lot of those scenes on the 23rd. I don't necessarily know that they broke WGA guidelines during that, but I do know there are very strict guidelines about what they can shoot, what they can improvise, what they can change, and things like that. I don't think, again, I think I brought this up previously in one of my other videos, I don't think it's a coincidence that at this time, while Lively is in London, she asks for the dailies. And it is, you know, after this, that tensions between Baldoni and Lively break down completely. We get the 17 protections for return to work, which include, you know, no improvisation, making sure that, you know, the intimacy coordinators on set, and also getting protection and editorial control over Blake Lively's scenes, intimate scenes, as well as young Lily's scenes as well. That seems to have come from nowhere, and I do wonder if it's because she got the dailies of the filming of the young actors that happened while she was away. All right, so that was the WGA strike. Oh, and that was the other thing I wanted to bring up, because that is actually in Lively's CRD complaint. Ooh, bring it up. When she talks about this list of 30 items that Baldoni says he was never presented with and she didn't go through at this June 4th meeting, one of the ones that she calls out here is no more asking or pressuring her to cross picket lines. So clearly this was a point of tension between them. All right, let's see what chat's saying. I don't know if you saw it, but Blake said something on the red carpet about writing for the rooftop team supposedly broke the WGA strike. Something about every accusation is actually an omission. Yes, I talked about this on Twitter, on X, because of like a response to that, talking about that Ryan Reynolds had, you know, broke strike and written that scene. However, in Baldoni's own timeline, the rooftop scene is written in April. And I think, if I remember rightly, give me one moment, I've got a timeline somewhere. And I can remember what the strike days were. Let's see if I've still got them up here. Maybe chat knows what the timeline days were. No, I don't have it up here anymore. Well, that's a shame. But yeah, the WGA strike doesn't happen until after WGA strike 2024. May. It started in May. So it didn't start until the month after. So the rooftop scene, while it was being written, was totally fine to be written because they hadn't gone on strike yet. Yet they kind of pushed this narrative that Ryan had broke rules and written it for him. Is Ryan a rep for SAG? I don't know. I don't know if he's SAG or a Writers Guild. But the problem with the writer's strike was that you don't have to be a member of the union. While they were on strike, you weren't allowed to do any work that would have been done by a WGA guild union member. I keep saying guild, I guess because it's Writers Guild. But you couldn't do any work that was doing to them. So essentially, while they were on strike, it wasn't okay for you to just go in and rewrite scripts, right? You know, that would be part of the thing that would not be okay. All right, let's go. All right, second thing that I wanted to talk about today was the intimacy coordinator. We're going to go back. We're going to go back to that because again, I got some tips from a Redditor who doesn't want their name mentioned, but they're somebody with some industry experience, and they had a kind of conversation with me to bring up some points that I had missed that I think are important to cover. in Baldoni's 179-page complaint, when Lively puts in her 17 protections for return to workplace, Baldoni goes through and kind of responds to all of them to say like why, this wasn't needed and it wasn't the case and all the rest of the stuff. So into her point about the nudity rider, Baldoni kind of makes the point that the Screen Actors Guild guidelines say that actors need to have at least 48 hours notice to review and negotiate a nudity rider. So the nudity rider is basically the list of things that you're going to do in a scene so that you can consent to them up front. And he talks about this and says, well, to have this argument of, well, we had a nudity rider, but she kind of refused to sign it. Now, he makes the point here that the nudity rider was provided to Lively's counsel on May the 8th. If you go to Baldoni's timeline, page 20, does that sound right? Yeah. So in Baldoni's timeline, on May 5th, Baldoni's still working with the intimacy coordinator. It calls out in his timeline, May 5th, he's emailing the intimacy coordinator to discuss them. I think we talked about this earlier in the week, where he's providing these notes to her about like what Blake Lively's willing to do and negotiating with the intimacy coordinator. This is the email that he sends to Jamie Heath and the intimacy coordinator that Blake Lively's not in. She's not even part of these discussions as he's discussing what these intimate scenes are going to look like, what Blake Lively's comfortable with and doing them. I call this out because on his calendar, right, May 5th, Friday, May the 5th, Monday is when they initially planned to shoot in Vegas and shoot a number of the intimate scenes. His own timeline calls that out. Production begins its first days in Vegas. A member of Lively's family falls ill, and they had to change and move those scenes and when they were going to be shot. There's no way, and he says here, notably, the sex scenes scheduled for the week of May had to be rescheduled multiple times due to illnesses and subsequent strikes. Wayfarer could not possibly be in line with SAG's guidelines for providing Lively with 48 hours notice of a nudity rider of what she was signing on to and agreeing in filming those intimate scenes if he's providing it on the day they were supposed to shoot those scenes. That makes sense? So, he's telling us they provided the nudity rider on May the 8th, which is also when they were supposed to shoot those scenes in Vegas. So he wasn't falling in line with the guidelines. Okay. So then let's go to May the 22nd, right? And this is the week that we already talked about this for the birthing scene and all of the scenes in the hospital. Pages 26. So May the 22nd, this is where he calls out that, they were doing this kissing and it wasn't improvised, but you see the script and it just says bends down kissing his face all over. So there's really no option but to improvise those kissings. And he calls out here that, there was no intimacy coordinator on set for this day because there was only a scene in which kissing was involved and no other intimacy, nudity, or simulated sex is required. Furthermore, during preparations, Lively and her attorneys did not indicate in her nudity rider that she wanted an intimacy coordinator present for those scenes. Instead, in line with industry practice, focused solely bringing on one only when there was simulated sex and nudity scenes, right? They're trying to say, we didn't have one on May 22nd because they were only doing kissing. And then, of course, what's the next thing they talk about shooting? It's the live birth scene where Lively is simulating nudity. She's partially nude. And this is the day where, Heath and Baldoni are trying to pressure her. Well, timeline's 27, I forget where. 29. Trying to pressure her into, it's in Lively's complaint, my bad. Into performing the scene fully nude, right? Why am I missing where this is? Baldoni timeline. CRD 15. My bad. Baldoni and Heath suddenly pressured Lively to simulate full nudity. So on the day where they say there was no intimacy coordinator because they were only doing kissing, they were also filming partial nudity, simulated nudity, and were trying to pressure Lively to simulate full nudity on that same day. So that's not true that they had the IC present when they were doing simulated sex and nudity scenes. By his own timeline and his admission, that was not the case. And then let me see. This is also when they stated about like they had closed sets. We had closed sets protocols, and I talked about how it says in their own call sheet that visitors were allowed on set, and I'd called out that Steve Sarowitz was present, and so if it's a closed set, why was he present on set? The person that tipped me off, the Redditor with the industry experience, kind of pointed out that Steve Sarowitz, as an executive producer, would probably still have been allowed to come on set even on a closed set because they were financing the film, kind of thing. So I was kind of wrong to say that he wouldn't have been allowed on there, but it does still, them talking about a closed set with approved visitors is still them not adhering to what would be an industry standard closed set policy. It is the Wayfarer closed set policy. So Blake Lively was right to call out that wasn't really what a closed set was. So we talked about that and the birth video. Okay, and then the next day is when they talk about the birth video, right? And so the May 23rd, the next day, is when they show her the birth video. So it wasn't, as he claims in his New York Times original complaint on page 24, where he says that it was, oh my gosh, where is it? The video was shown as part of a creative discussion in preparation for the birthing scene. It was shown to them. It was shown to Blake Lively the day after at lunch, because Baldoni had said to Heath that Lively had not seen a water birth, post home birth, and they felt that she would want to see Jamie Heath and his wife naked. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's wild. But also, in his timeline, coming back to the intimacy coordinator, they pointed out another thing that I had missed. June 3rd is also when Blake Lively films the scene in the bathroom where, she's after she's been abused, she's in the bathroom reflecting, looking in the mirror. It's a very intense scene. It was a scene in which they were filming simulated nudity. Now they talk here and says a closed set protocol was implemented that day. Again, it's the Wayfarer closed set with restricting visitors but still allowing them. And they point out that Lively had written the scene herself, was deeply attuned to its intimate and emotional nature, and played a significant role in directing the action. Notably, Baldoni's character was not involved in this scene, and the call sheet also says the cast is one person, it's just her. They include this scene from the script where they talk about she turns on the shower, she undresses, and then she stops and looks at herself in the mirror. In his 179-page complaint, he also refers to this scene, and tells us that there was also no intimacy coordinator. When he's talking about the demand for the nudity rider and kind of saying, well, she didn't that she demanded that any footage previously shot without the nudity rider in place may not be used without her consent, they kind of say, well, there's no simulated sex that's been filmed yet. In fact, there was only one scene involving simulated nudity had ever been filmed, and it was a scene Lively knew of well in advance, given that she wrote it herself, knew when it would be filmed, and directed the action, never requesting a nudity rider or an intimacy coordinator. So even the scene that we're talking about here, when we come to June 3rd, by Baldoni's own documents, she did not have a nudity rider in place for this day. And she also didn't have an intimacy coordinator. So going back to what he said earlier from May 22nd, where he said, oh no, we were in line with industry standard focusing on bringing one on for simulated sex and nudity scenes. No, you didn't. By your own admission, you didn't have one on either of the 2 days where you were filming simulated nudity. And it's in his documents where he admits it. So yeah, very strange. Blake has 4 children. Why would she want to see a water birth? Yeah, I don't understand. And I talked about this before when we covered the birth scene before, the birthing video before. I don't understand why you're explaining to a mother of 4 who is filming a scene in a hospital where she's giving a normal hospital birth, and she's also immediately afterwards, right? The setting of the scene is immediately afterwards. She talks to Ryle, who has been her abusive partner and telling him she wants a divorce and she wants to protect her daughter from his abuse. So not very like loving and intimate scene, while you're then saying, hey, we really need to show you a birth that is a water birth, at home birth, where the, Heath and his wife are cuddling and having this really beautiful, tender, emotional moment of birth. Like, those two scenes could not be more opposite. And like I say in the timeline, he did kind of reneges on saying, oh, it was in preparation for the birth scene. He's like, oh, it's a day after at lunch, and we showed her because she didn't know what one looked like and we thought she might be interested. Like, I can honestly promise you, none of your co-workers are interested in any videos where you, your wife, or any of your family are nude. Don't show them, ever. Like, it's just a good general rule. If there's any videos of you involving nudity, don't show a co-worker. And like, don't show one without at least asking first, right? Like, that's the other thing that's wild to me, is like, even if you were going to go through all of those steps and miss how inappropriate her boss showing her a video of himself and his wife naked is by itself, the consent thing is still like, where was that? Anyway, you get me, man. The slow dance video looks scripted for me. For me, it turns the question from Didi Arasa to, is a director leading kissing with his co-star without consent sexual harassment? Yeah, I mean, like we've covered earlier in the week, there's 3 or 4 scenes where the kissing is not really described. It's not really called out. The lack of a nudity rider means these scenes were not planned out and blocked out. So how could you ever consent to them without that work with the intimacy coordinator and working on those nudity riders and those writers to kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to do in the scene. Every scene is improvised, and even in his own timeline, he talks about, well, she kissed him twice in one take, she kissed him 3 times in the other take. So there was improvisation. There was no strict, this is what we're going to do. And if you're not going to have that, like with the dance scene, how can you consent to him putting his thumb in your mouth? You can't. Or him all over your neck. You can't. So yeah, it's interesting to me, and I'm grateful for this Redditor pointing it out, because yeah, it confirms that there was no intimacy coordinator on set. Even as he claims there was, his prior filings made it clear that there wasn't. There were not nudity writers for the nude scenes, and there was not an intimacy coordinator for them. I feel like the only time that an intimacy coordinator was present in this May-June block is when they filmed the intimacy scene with the young Lily. And I think that's the only time that they were present, because Isabella Ferrer did give an interview where she talked about having an intimacy coordinator, but that could also have been something that was reshot after June, when production restarted in January, when Blake Lively's 17 protections were in place. So we don't know. But it looks like that's the only scene that there was an intimacy coordinator present for. Okay, let's see what goes. She maybe declined the intimacy coordinator initially because he made her feel safe around it, and then changed her mind if it started getting creepy. Here's the thing, she didn't decline the intimacy coordinator. We covered this earlier, but I just want to close that out. Intimacy coordinator. When he hires her, she says, I'll meet her when we start. That's not her saying, I don't want to meet her, I'm refusing to meet her. That is, I will meet her when we start filming. And even the producer, in the response when Justin says she doesn't want to meet the coordinator until we start, says that's fine. Nobody here is calling this as a red flag, or that this is inappropriate, or she's doing something wrong. They're all saying, hey, that's great. It's only now, after the lawsuits come out and we're going through the smear campaign, that suddenly, oh, she didn't want to meet the intimacy coordinator is this huge deal. It certainly was not a problem that anybody called out back in April of 2023. Yeah, she just said she didn't want to meet in advance. And I think this is like the thing that gets me about a lot of this case. Baldoni's being very specific in his words. And he knows that, like, technically correct, while completely misinterpreting and misrepresenting the spirit of what is being said. All right. So those were the first 2 things I wanted to talk about. Before we get into the questions, I got one more piece. Because this came out yesterday. An article about an interview that Justin Baldoni's lawyer Brian Friedman had done kind of saying that, oh, there's some things in her case that don't make sense. And I wanted to cover those as kind of like a nice wrap up of like, hey, let's see what they say are the problems with her case. Does what Brian Freeman's saying here lined up? After that, then we'll get into the Q&A. So I will give you the reminder here. I'll post the link again in chat. Once we get into the Q&A, I will gift out the memberships. Make sure you click that link, turn on gifts, so that you can make sure you can get your membership when we get there. We're giving out 5 of them. It's YouTube. I don't get to pick, so totally random and fair, hopefully. All right. So he gave this podcast and he talked about it, and he says, okay, there's 3 things that don't make sense in Lively's case. Remove. Okay, let's just get rid of that. Bye-bye. Bye, Jen. Bye. All right, so let's go into it. What's the doing giving statements in the middle of a lawsuit? Yeah, I mean, he's already been warned about this. Everything he says to the press then can obviously be used and submitted in court as well. So he's got to be very, very careful about what he says here, because if at any point he says something in the press and then changes his story later, that's going to work against him. This is why, lawyers always tell you, shut up. Don't say anything, because the less you say, the less trouble you can get yourself into. The fact that he doesn't seem to want to take that advice and is just always constantly on the stump for PR is a big kind of clue that he doesn't feel like his lawsuit is very strong. But I'll talk about that later. So anyway, so the first one is, he says he disagrees over the claims of the retaliation. It says the issue is ultimately, number 1, did anyone ever engage in any type of behavior that was in any way retaliatory, or is this something where organically negative press came out about Blake Lively? Now, we've already kind of gone through the smear campaign and the social media manipulation campaign. We've devoted like 2 whole episodes to that. So the answer there is an resounding yes. But to recap, I think I closed his timeline, didn't I? We bring back his timeline up. His own timeline disputes that, right? I mean, did I just close it again? We're having technical issues today. Getting too excited is what's going on. All right, so 121. This is the day where the Daily Mail reached out to say, hey, somebody had planned a story. And, in Baldoni's own timeline, he says that Jones had contacted the Daily Mail reporter about a story on Blake Lively. Everybody ends up finding out about it. Sloan and Sony later discovered that someone from Baldoni's team had been communicating a negative story to the media. They blame Jones. Jones blames Abel and Nathan. But in his own timeline, he accepts that somebody on Baldoni's team was planting negative stories about Blake Lively with the Daily Mail. So this idea that he's like, well, it was organic and it was negative press that came out. You've already admitted in your own timeline your team was planting negative stories. So, yes, the answer to that is we've got that proven. He then claims that the 17-point list that Baldoni signed was the first that he'd heard of those complaints. And this was kind of like their initial kind of response to the CRD complaint, was that, she didn't get Baldoni to sign an agreement saying that they would stop. What they agreed to was a 17 bullet point list that came out of the blue from her lawyer, and it was a return to work document as alleged in the pleadings, and many of those things have nothing to do with harassment at all. Within the 17-point list was a demand that he wouldn't come into her trailer while she was breastfeeding with Baldoni. It says Baldoni. With Baldoni challenging Friedman. Oh no, Baldoni is the host of the podcast. My bad. With Baldoni challenging Friedman, saying there's some sort of assumption that if you take the time to put it in the agreement, that it was an issue coming out of the past. So his defense here is basically saying, look, we did sign, right, those 17 points, but that was the first point we heard of them, right? These were just a good idea. All of these things here were just good ideas that we thought we'd put in. And, their response was like, we agree that this is in the best interest for protecting the workspace for everybody, right? Like, okay. Again, we know that this is garbage, right? Because even if you take all of this stuff where the language very clearly refers to issues that have happened here. No one will attempt to enter, interrupt, pressure, or request entrance to artist's trailer while she's undressed. If the artist is exposed to COVID-19, she must be provided notice. Knowing that there was exposure to COVID-19 and that there was an issue and that she kind of called off sick, that these are related to prior things. Bye. Guess we're getting the bots today. They're upset with me. Oh, that they're related to prior events. But then when Lively's lawyer sends it to them, she does so, right, after Heath reaches out to them to say, hey, are you going to come and return to work? We're ready to shoot. And do I have it on their timeline? I don't. The bots have found us. Yes, they have. Someone's upset. So when they issue the 17 protections, he's saying that they came out of blue. If you read the email that Lively's lawyers send to, not to Heath, but to the film's legal counsel, the email says it's no surprise to the film's producers. It isn't a surprise. This is not out of the blue. That the experience of shooting the film has been deeply concerning on many levels. The complaints of our client and others have been repeatedly conveyed and well documented throughout pre-production and photography, right? So they're already referencing that what we're about to provide you is based on a number of events that had happened that was concerning, and that our client and others have repeatedly documented them, right? And again, in his timeline, we've talked about this through those previous 2 hours. There was 4 separate meetings. They all of the apologies. We're going to talk about it in a second. And then it ends and it says, okay, if the production is unwilling to accept or uphold these protections, our client is prepared to pursue her full legal rights and remedies. This is very clearly saying, hey, agree to these or we pursue legal action. There is no understanding that what is being presented to you is suggestions or good ideas or things that Lively thinks would improve the workplace. The legal letter from her lawyer makes it very clear this is based off prior issues that we've had, and that you can either choose to accept these or we're going to go the legal route, right? So Brian here talking about like, well, we didn't really know and there weren't really any issues that we knew about beforehand, definitely isn't the case. But again, going back to his own timeline, on the 26th, after the issues where we talked about on the 22nd, the 23rd, where we have, the sexy comment, the birth video, the inappropriate kissing, what else was there? I think that was it, right? Like, so it's the birth video, the inappropriate kissing, the sexy comment, and then also the dance montage. So again, with the improvised kissing, all of those things happened on the 23rd. So after that, Blake Lively gets COVID on 25th, or she's sick on 25th. There's the outbreak of COVID amongst multiple members of the crew. The 26th, Baldoni responds to her and says, I know this week is a lot and I'm committed to making things run smoother across the board. An admission that there were some issues in production. By the time we get to the 29th, Wayfarer is told by Sony about the sexy comments, the post-home video, as well as issues with the assistant directors. So again, some of those items that had already been mentioned were in there. If Blake Lively comes to you afterwards and then says, hey, maybe don't show me any videos, don't show me discussions with sex or nudity as it relates to spouses, and you've had multiple conversations about a video where you did that and showed that and did that exact thing, you'd remember. And then as they're talking about it, they accept that this is filed in association with the CRD complaint. So even here in the timeline, they're associating the May 29th conversation to the items that are in the CRD complaint that they said that is not connected to anything. The May 30th, he actually calls out that Baldoni, reflecting on the conversation with the executive about the sexy comment and the birth video, decides to write her an apology. I want you to know I've been made aware of your concerns and I hear you. They are fully received and adjustments will be made imminently. So second apology for the behavior he says he doesn't know about. June 1st, Lively comes back to production, requests a meeting, and they talk about she shared a set of grievances she appeared to have spent the last 5 days overanalyzing. Ooh. So what did she talk about? Well, she talked about the sexy comment. She talked about, Baldoni here apologized for a third time. Oh, they're very upset. And just to answer your question there, when am I going to realize and deal with that person? That is a person who made headline news for wanting to, talking about how they were going to start a holy war against feminism, and they were going to be famous for what they were going to do to women. We're not going to talk about that person. I have made videos about that person. They don't get to be debated. They can go talk to other people who want to platform that kind of nonsense. Not here. If you want to threaten violence against women, we have nothing to talk about. I think you struck a nerve. Yeah. I think so. All right. So they talk about it here. Baldoni giving his third apology. So again, like, how are we going to talk about that they didn't know about it when he's talking here that they gave 3 apologies on June 1st, but a year and a half later they don't know. All right. So then let's move on to his third. His third claim is that Lively claimed that Baldoni harassed her. The issue of harassment is a key one, says Friedman, and he says, I can say that with certainty my client is one of the most honorable people I've ever met, and that without question he did not. Whether Lively felt harassed or not is one thing, but does it rise to the legal definition of harassment? The answer to that is no. I can't speak to how people feel. And I think on this, it's interesting because, when we talk about harassment, a lot of the allegations they talk about here is the improvised kissing and unwanted touch. Unwanted kissing, unwanted touch, which is absolutely harassment, but also rises to the level of sexual assault. And if you think that I'm kind of being hyperbolic here, this week, Leslie Sloan had filed her legal team had filed a letter in response to the motion to dismiss. And we talked about, hey, we'll continue this series. I'm going to talk about the events that happened this week on Sunday. So I'm going to talk about all of the legal documents that were filed on Sunday. I will talk about this letter. I'll expand on this a little more. But in there, they're responding to the claim that she had, that Baldoni's team had put out there, that she said that Lively was sexually assaulted. And she makes the point, or her legal team make the point, that Baldoni's team were comfortable with the idea that the stories were leaking about the unwanted kiss, the fat shaming, and inappropriate touching, which would all count as a legal definition of sexual assault. But they didn't seem to be upset or worried about it. And I'm talking specifically about, like, the article here that went out to the Daily Mail, where they're talking about Baldoni being abusive and chauvinistic, that he was borderline abusive on set, that he felt attacked by the women on set and the shut down. And this was an article where, like, they talk about, hey, I don't think that's not bad. They talk about Melissa Nathan had helped shaped and taken out some of the claims in that news article. I can tell you've done a lot of work here. There's nothing about being unsafe or the fat comments or anything sexual. And that's what they're celebrating. They seemed entirely comfortable with this when it was just about that. There's also the issue of when TMZ reached out about the 3 HR complaints, right? And they talk about that internally. The 3 HR complaints, these are the different ones. Abel's response is, I think we need to position it as the claims that are already out there about the unwanted kissing. So again, like, does that count as harassment? Actually, it counts as very much as harassment, and it counts as actually probably as legally and defined as sexual assault. So they were very clear that they were accepting that behavior had happened. So in terms of, again, Friedman saying, well, does this count? Do these allegations rise to the definition of legal of harassment? There's a reasonable case that they rise to the legal definition of sexual assault. But again, I'll talk about this on Sunday through that document. And I want to make it clear that nobody's saying that anybody was saying that about Justin or is accusing him of that. This is more a hypothetical legal argument that was made as the legal teams are going back and forth. All right. If he doesn't have written consent for the bite, it's a crime. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he had consent for any of these things, right? As we showed, there's no nudity rider or riders in place for all of these scenes. They mostly seem to point to the script saying, you know, some kissing happens. Well, what are you consenting to? Yeah. All right. Let me see. Yeah, so talked about all of that, talked about Sunday. All right, so let's give out the memberships. So let's go figure out how I go about doing that. I could just want I do this. Membership gifting. There we go. All right. Cool. Here we go, guys. We're going to give out the 5 free memberships. Boom. I don't know what this is going to do. I hope it does something good. All right, there we go. Cool. It worked. There we go. So congratulations, Lucy, Musty, Netherpiece, Sophia, and Courtney. There you go. I wonder if those all went to bots. If you got a gift, say hi. Anyway, all right. So from here, let's go start talking about the Q&A. And guys in chat, if you have questions that we haven't covered tonight, feel free to throw them up. Congrats to everybody. Yep. And if you've got questions, throw them up. Let's talk about them and we'll go through them. All right. First one. Sylvain asked, thanks for breaking this down. A few questions for Friday. Why were Justin's team complaining about the cost when they spent 20 million trying to destroy Blake? Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. It's obviously not one I can answer, but I think it's important that, like, if you go through the complaint, I've talked about this, like, they constantly complain about money, about her overrunning the budget for the wardrobe, or taking time off because she's sick, having to reschedule shoots because she's sick or because she didn't come back. So it's something they talk about a lot, and then they turn around and then they spend, you know, $15,000 a month, or sorry, $30,000 a month because of tag PR plus the social media manipulation, 30 grand a month, to then go after her. So they've spent at least 100 grand that we know of. It's probably 2 to 3 times that invested in just this whole smear campaign and going after her. I don't know, because it's very clear that, you know, the only people supporting Justin aren't really his supporters. I've talked about this in the video I put out today. You know, they are people who want to destroy and are opposed to everything his platform stood for. You know, these are people who call Me Too a hoax. They question all the allegations made by women. So it's everything against what he stood for, and that's basically who has thrown their lot in with him now. I don't see him being able to recover and continue a platform on what he was doing. I don't know if then he just kind of reinvents himself, you know, just becomes more just focused on deconstructing masculinity and being like a men's coach type deal, or whether he does the right-wing flip grift, given that he's got a ready-made right-wing audience for him now. We'll see. We'll see. Can Blake prove it's in court that it was a PR campaign against her? Well, we won't know, right, until the court case next year. The whole point of the series was been, you know, showing the evidence over this last week that there is compelling evidence in Baldoni's own documents that show, yes, they launched a smear campaign as of August the 7th. They were planting negative stories in the Daily Mail against Blake Lively. I mean, that's by his own admission. That seems pretty clear cut that there was a smear campaign against her. Why are women believing Justin more than men? Most of the men. Why are women so hateful to Blake, to another woman? I mean, you know, that is probably an hour's worth of topic on itself. I think, you know, that's what we've seen from this, and that's really what motivated me to kind of do so much content on this, was seeing there was a wave of online misogyny ready to just pile on top of this, even without the quote-unquote smear campaign, and you know, understanding what was organic and what organic means is, I think, is a huge part of this, right? Is this ready-made kind of misogynistic social media army who are ready to jump on any of these sort of allegations and kind of boost traffic, kind of, you know, smearing her, dragging up everything, doing all of this. Does that still count as organic, right? It's not connected possibly to Baldoni's PR people. You know, they didn't engineer it, they didn't encourage it, but would you consider it organic? It's a big question. As far as I understood it, the hardest part for her is to prove damages. The PR itself seems pretty slam dunk. I mean, I think the thing with the damages is that would only count, I think, on like the defamation and the retaliation. I think more where this case is going to be settled is on the fact that there were complaints that were raised. Wayfarer neglected to investigate them, and you know they're going to get their on employment law basically, especially since in January. I don't think I've talked about this before, and maybe I'll cover it on Sunday. In January, Wayfarer hired a third party to investigate the complaints that Blake Lively had made like almost 2 years before. So, you know, again, a little too late that they are only starting to investigate these now that there's a lawsuit. Reeves, don't you think it's dangerous what's going on in society, making people guilty by a court of opinion? Okay, we can take a second on this. Here's the thing, Reeves. Right, the whole pushback and the kind of like the misogynistic wave against Blake Lively is this outrage that a woman has made an allegation of sexual harassment against Baldoni, right? And the complaint is this could destroy his career, this could, you know, impact his family, all of these things, right? I think, would that be fair, Reeves, to kind of summarize the argument like that? Here's what I would say to that. At the same time that this came out, there were incredibly serious allegations that came out against Neil Gaiman. The allegations against Neil Gaiman are far worse than anything that has been said about what Baldoni had done on set. Nobody has really complained about, oh, well, that's unfair for these allegations to come out when they're not proven in court. The argument here isn't that he's being charged as guilty without court. It's that she even made sexual harassment allegations. Again, the New York Times article, when it was written, pointed out that, you know, Blake Lively had filed this complaint. They were not accusing him of anything. They were not saying he definitely did do something. They simply reported on the fact. And Baldoni's team and his legal team have argued that this was an outrage, that they're not allowed to report on the fact that she made a filing, that she should have done all of this in private. And I think the only reason for that is because it's again part of this movement to say we want to silence women. There shouldn't be this case that a man's reputation should be publicly tarnished in these ways, and that it should have to go through court. And I think the argument is, if you have somebody who has these allegations against them, sure, the guilt should be settled in court, but I don't think there's any issue with somebody raising those allegations. You can issue a statement and deny them and say, hey, these are not correct. There were some mistakes that were made. We look forward to proving out our case in court, and done. The idea that it destroys a man's career, when the same day that, you know, we're talking about this, there's been a ton of social media today talking about Jonathan Majors and how they want to redeem him and bring him back into Hollywood and all the rest of the stuff. And this is a man who was not only alleged to have committed domestic violence, went through a court case, was convicted, and he's still being rehabilitated and having an army of people who want to welcome him back into his career. The idea that these allegations are incredibly harmful and damage a man just isn't the case. I mean, you know, I don't want to cause some stuff, but there are many prominent public figures who have convictions for these things that still make a, you know, very good living and live far better than I do, far better than you probably, Reeves. I don't know what you do, but are making vastly greater sums of money. And these are people who have had convictions, and multiple, you know, women come forward and talk about the things they've done to them. So that's what I would say there is, I don't think it's dangerous. I think, and I've always thought, and the reason why I've been so on this is I think it is a dangerous path when we say victims don't get to air their allegations. We can as a society and we can as a group of people accept that they are allegations and move on from that. But I think it's very dangerous when we say, like we've done with Blake Lively, she's not believable if she behaves this way. Oh, look at her. She's going to South by Southwest. She doesn't seem like she's been assaulted or harassed, I should say, sorry. She goes to Saturday Night Live. This is not the behavior of somebody who's been arrested. Things like that. All of that ties into our entire culture that dismisses victims of both domestic violence, sexual misconduct. And I think, you know, the frustration for me is those same attitudes that dismiss women dismiss men who are victims. And a lot of this kind of pushback comes from men who claim to advocate for other men, but by perpetuating these attitudes, they make it so much harder for everyone, all victims, to come forward, speak up, be believed, and have their day in court free from the kind of harassment, ridicule, and just like career destruction that is happening to not just Blake Lively, but anybody who has supported her. You go look at the reviews for A Simple Favor. It's been review bombed on all of the platforms, you know, and we're talking about, well, what about the damage to Baldoni's reputation or his career options? Go look at what is happening right now to everybody connected to this case. They are having, you know, their social media is bombarded with messages. Any projects they're attached to has a wave of people attacking them. It's not even proportional at all. Okay. All right. Was there anything else that I missed on my big long rant? Getting back on track. Cup of tea and calm down. I think I should have taken Sylvian's advice there. Let's go on to the next question. I think that says Tramzan? I don't know, but TR4 MSA MSY4N. I apologize for getting your name wrong. Can't explain it, as Wayfarer are more on getting passion projects to give voice to certain causes, but why do people think Blake talking about how she gets projects based on how she can contribute is a bad thing? I believe this is in reference to, I think, the Forbes interview that was kind of pushed out where, you know, Blake Lively talked about she really seeks projects that she can kind of contribute and take over. And it was kind of taken out of context to kind of say like, hey, look, you know, she did the same thing to It Ends With Us, she takes over. When really, you know, the whole Khaleesi text that she'd sent Baldoni was a huge explanation of her talking about throughout her career, she's always wanted to contribute more, to not just be an actress, not just be seen as a pretty face in the corner, says her lines and go homes. She wants to contribute to projects and really be engaged and involved. She wants to help with script and work on those things, and that she provides a great deal of contribution to the projects she's done. Sometimes that contribution is recognized and sometimes it's not. Paul Feig had talked about while doing the press for Another Simple Favor, had talked about how great it is to work with her because, you know, she really is involved and helps out with that. Now, yeah, that not every director may want that kind of input. But what I did think was interesting, and I think a couple of people have pointed this out, is while this whole discussion is going on, Jason Isaacs, this story came out about Jason Isaacs of him on Harry Potter and how he influenced Lucius Malfoy's design, and that originally they had a very plain look for him, and so he was like, no, I don't want to look like this. He went to the makeup hair department, tried to get a wig, they didn't have one, and so he got like a tinfoil wig from a gas station type deal that they had, a party wig. And then he took wanted a cape, they didn't have a cape, so he grabbed a curtain, and so he was trying to change the design of his character and saying no, getting into this character, I think this character wouldn't look like in Harry Potter they call people who aren't wizards muggles, right? He wouldn't look like a normal person because he felt like he was superior. He would be very his whole presence would be one in which he made himself look different to normal humans. Really great insight into the character, and so a great look because very iconic for the character. But nobody's really talking about how he takes over the movie. He's taking over the costume, he's taking over the character design and things like that. And so again, I think it's another thing where it really just depends on context. Where when Blake does it, it's bad, and it's largely because she's a woman, and largely because she's a woman who's making these allegations. Now suddenly this is a huge problem. All right, keep going if you have other questions. Vandervee says, not a question so much as speculation. I'm struck by the fact that Steve Sarowitz was at the set when the childbirth scene was filmed. It should have been a closed set, but he was there in spite of it being a closed set. Why on that specific day? Does it have something to do with the obsession that they all have with motherhood and childbirth? Was he just there to witness it or make sure it was captured correctly? I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily think there was anything malicious or untoward about his appearance that day. I think he was just probably coming in on set. I think it's interesting that the day he was there, there were all of these issues on set, and then of course the day after there were all of the additional issues on the 23rd. But I think it's more just from what the Redditor who is in the industry, and I would definitely defer to their experience, had told me about him being there. It's a very normal thing for the people who are, the executive producers and the finance people to show up on set and kind of basically, especially with Steve Sarowitz kind of being the financer of Wayfarer, right, to see what's happening with your money, basically. I don't think it's anything more than that. That particular day with her doing the birth scene, was there maybe he wanted to catch a look? I don't know. I don't necessarily think we need to speculate on that. I think it was just more he wanted to come in and come see the production and see what his money was doing. I always tell my honey when he hears hooves, he think horses, not zebras, and yet here I am thinking it's zebras. Yeah, and I think it's very easy for us to go down these paths and speculate and kind of think the worst of these people. And I would just generally not encourage that, because I think it's better if we stick to what we can know with reasonable certainty and work from there. A lot of this stuff is going to be pure speculation for the next year, right? Until we get to the court case. There's a lot of people with a lot of social media channels who've got to make a year's worth of content, and they're going to get very little information for the next few months. So it's going to be interesting. Came in late. Was there a discussion about the AEO order? Not today, Marcy. What we're going to do is, once we wrap up tonight, I am going to start doing this as a weekly series. We're going to start on Sunday. So you only got a couple of days. And what I'll do on Sunday is I'm going to go over all of the documents that were filed this week and all of the news. And then what I'll start doing is doing like a regular update. It might start out as weekly and then may drop off to monthly as this progresses, because this pace isn't going to be the same. As they get through discovery, there's not going to be a lot that we'll see unless they make filings. And we're not going to see a lot of the evidence. So it's going to go quiet for a while. People are going to have to find another topic to talk about. And unless, Brian Friedman keeps talking to the press. It's like he's going to be our content generator for the rest of it. All right, let's go to Angela's question. So Angela had a bunch of questions. All right, Reeve's got another one before we jump to that. So the question, was it possible to complete the movie if it's that horrible? Why stay? No, I think, again, Reeve, these are a lot of things that people have said, right? Like, if it was so bad, why did she stay? When the initial fat shaming conversation happened, where was that, like April? I forget, February, right? Lively actually gives Baldoni the option to recast her. Where is it? He talks here. Lively told Baldoni if she could not get on board with how she works, she had 2 weeks to recast her. So throughout this whole issue, Lively makes it clear that, hey, if I'm the problem, get rid of me and recast me, or work in a way in which I feel safe, which is a completely reasonable boundary to put on your work environment. When the 17 protections come out, essentially the same argument is made. Hey, if you want me to return to work, this is what I need. Either give it to me or get somebody else. And both times, Wayfarer basically say, yeah, we'll comply. We'll give you what you need. And then don't. So it's not a case of why did she continue to stay? It's more a case of why did Wayfarer keep promising her that they would change and then not doing it? Why was this bait and switch? If she was so terrible, why didn't they just recast her, right? If his whole argument is she was demanding and threatening and extorting them and trying to take over the movie, kick her ass to the curb, right? You don't want that person around. They're very toxic, and especially with the rest of the cast, they would have complained too. None of that is in his story, his complaint. He doesn't even show a single screenshot or email message of her making a threat or an extortive attempt. Instead, what we see is Lively continue to ask for a safe working environment repeatedly, repeated apologies from Wayfarer, and an admission that they're going to change. There's 4 separate meetings about Baldoni's behavior. The bigger question, I think, is why did Wayfarer keep Baldoni? If you have a director who is constantly getting these complaints that Sony's involved in, that the legal team are now involved in, why was he kept around when he was very clearly a liability throughout the entire production? Again, with Lava, why should a woman have to leave her job because she's being harassed? Because anytime you have that happen, what are you doing? You're just setting the next person up to be in the same situation, right? You may have got yourself out of it, but you're setting the same person up. But it's also then blaming the victim for their choices, their decisions, instead of keeping the focus on the accountability for the perpetrator. This is always about Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath made a decision to create a very misogynistic, uncomfortable, unsafe environment, and despite repeated calls by multiple people, didn't want to change their behavior. And I think that raises serious questions. I think, and think about yourself, Reeves. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, don't do this, and then somebody else comes to you and say, hey, don't do this, if you continue to carry on in that behavior, if you've been told by multiple people, don't behave in this way, you're kind of a dick. Like, and maybe that's fine, right? Maybe you don't like those people, maybe you're comfortable with being it, but own the behavior. To then turn around and say, well, it's all those other people that are a problem. Like, you're delulu. All right. So let's go to Angela's questions. I think basement was first where we're going, right? We're going to go basement first. Who was the first tabloid to run the story of Baldoni in the basement at the premiere? So the first, it originally appears in his New York complaint. So he was the first one to reveal it. Where is the New York one? Is it this one? No, timeline. I think this one's it, right? 179. 87? Yeah, there we go. He was the first one to kind of say that he was sent to the basement in his initial response to the New York Times. They talk about, was it here? Yeah, there we go. That he was held in a basement before being escorted into a separate theater after Lively's departure. Now, again, what's missing from his initial complaint is what's put into the timeline, that basically the cast had said they were going to boycott if he went, and that then Wayfarer kind of suggested this idea of 2 separate theaters. Baldoni will go walk the red carpet, and he will leave the red carpet when everybody else arrives. And then they, initially here they don't talk about any of that. They just basically blame Blake Lively for all of that, when it was Wayfarer's. It was Wayfarer negotiating and making sure that the cast didn't boycott, that they suggested that plan. So yeah, after that, I think. I didn't include it, but basically what happens after that on January the 7th. So this was filed, I think December 31st or the 1st of January. It was like right on New Year's Eve. They filed this. Less than a week later, Friedman appeared on Megyn Kelly's show. I thought I had the link for it. I don't, and I'm not going to bring it up now. But that's when he gives Megyn Kelly the voicemail that Baldoni said, where he's like, I'm sent to the basement and this was supposed to be my big night. And we're just going to carry on and not care. And then it's on January the 16th where like most of the news stories then come out, because on January 16th is when his 179 page complaint comes out, which is when he includes the pictures. And so there's a lot more press about it then, because you've got this, great picture of him with all of the pallets of soft drinks and stuff to make it look like, oh gosh, look, this is so terrible. Look how hard done to is. And so there was a lot more press generated for that once the undeaded complaint came through. All right, any more questions? Let's see right now. If I missed your question, repeat it, because it may have scrolled past and I may not have seen it. So if you've got something that I haven't answered, please do feel free to repeat it until you get me to acknowledge you. Okay, so next question from Angela was, what's the source or veracity of the 3 HR complaints that we saw a few weeks ago? So for those who don't know, a couple of weeks ago, there were 3 HR complaints that were leaked. I think I will go bring them up and show them to you. And they claim to be the actual 3 HR complaints. I'm not going to talk about the source because I don't necessarily know who got them and where they got them from. So we don't know. We'll just say that there were 3 HR complaints that were being circulated. I don't think they're legit at all. And I say that just because they don't look like reports. But the big thing is that, as I talked about, Wayfarer conducted an investigation now in January. They hired a third party to do it, and we have the letter between from Lively's legal team responding to them. At no point did they acknowledge that any previous investigation was ever occurred. They're only talking about this new third party that has only just started the investigation. So if there was any prior investigation that was done, that would have been talked about, especially given that part of what Lively's complaint is that there was no investigation done. So I don't think they fit up with the complaint. The other issue is in Blake Lively's complaint, we have Baldoni's team talking about the HR complaints, and they say one was from Blake and somebody else read the sexy comment, and they say the third one is from somebody with Jamie in her apartment in New York City. Now, I've talked before, I'm not going to mention who those names are, but one of those names has been revealed by the Hollywood Reporter and clarified more on that story with the apartment in New York City. So that these complaints don't line up with what we already know from what Baldoni's own team were talking about. The other issue with them is you go through and read them, you know, they talk about he filmed, you know, a scene, and you know, he talks about, you know, the birth scene, you know, and it creates this very vivid image of, you know, Blake Lively asking that she needed something to cover with, and you know, he doesn't want her to. I think is it this one? Yeah, they're talking here with about a scene where essentially Baldoni straight on assaults one of the cast members while trying to film an intimate scene, grabbing hold of her thighs and doing stuff. In pure fiction. I don't believe that for a second. And again, some of this stuff would come out. I think it's this one is the first one I was talking about, where, you know, they touched an intimate part of somebody's body, and Baldoni responds with, "It's fine, I'm totally hot for my wife," in a dismissive tone. Complainant relayed to Baldoni it did not matter what his relationship with his spouse was like, that he didn't give permission to touch, that they did not give him permission to touch. Baldoni then responded, "Oh no, we better go see HR," to which the complainant responded, "I will." And then there's like a bit at the end where, you know, 18 minutes after the incident, complainant said, "Justin Baldoni just literally grabbed my butt in front of a camera. I want to talk to somebody at Sony like now." Like, no. this is pure fantasy. I would definitely stay away from taking these. And again, I think generally you're going to see a lot of this stuff kind of leak out, and I would stay away from anything that isn't part of the legal filings. Now, as I've covered before, Baldoni's editing the crap out of his screenshots and deleting messages, so even the complaints shouldn't probably be taken as evidence. I think those with legal backgrounds would point out that until it's entered into evidence and verified, even the complaints themselves and the evidence within them shouldn't be treated as fact. You made a video on who leaked Blake's complaint to the TMZ and all the other tabloids, and they're blaming, yeah, kid, it was Baldoni's team's tactics. Yeah, we talked about that it was when Baldoni's team got the complaint on the 20th, one of the first things that Brian Friedman did was contact TMZ and leak the CRD complaint and his response to it to TMZ, which ensued. About two dozen articles were written the same day that the New York Times article was released, in order for them to dominate the press cycle, get their message out, and to silence Blake Lively from putting her allegations out. Again, which, you know, ties back to what I was talking about the whole point here has been to silence a victim. Yeah. All right. What's the next one? Tricking. Okay, so that would be this one. Did Jamie Heath trick Baldoni into hiring crisis PR by planting a negative story deliberately to stoke Justin Baldoni's fear and paranoia about his reputation? If that's proven out in Jones's lawsuit, does that create a Baldoni's own lawsuit? Right. Okay. Good question. Based off the evidence we've got right now, I don't think so. Right. And that's not to say that we don't see these sort of fracturing amongst the Wayfarer parties happen. One of the issues right now is that all of Wayfarer and everybody involved here, all of Wayfarer's employees, Justin Baldoni, Jamie Heath, Jennifer Abel, and Melissa Nathan and Jed Wallace are all currently being represented by Brian Friedman. They do not have similar interests. It is going to, at some point through this case, behoove them to talk about where some of that accountability and blame is going to lay. And as that happens, as we get into the case, you know, Wayfarer are obviously going to try to put more blame on other people. Jennifer Abel is probably going to try and put more blame on Melissa Nathan and Wayfarer, and that she was just, you know, passing messages along, and that she really wasn't trying to do anything. She was just doing her job. As that happens, they're going to fracture and they probably are going to get separate legal representation. I don't think this thing is going to continue with all of these different parties under one lawyer with all of these competing interests. So I do think something like this, where they're going to start talking about, well, it was X's idea or they came up with it, is going to happen. As for your actual question, I think it's very difficult for Justin to claim that he was tricked into it. So I showed these before. These are the exhibits that were attached to the CRD complaint in the New York Times article. Not all of the text messages are in the other documents, so it's very useful to have this because there's some extra information in it. This is the text exchange when Jennifer Abel and Justin realized that Ryan Reynolds had blocked her, had blocked him, sorry. And Jennifer Abel's talking about, we can put a plan down. He's talking about, I need you guys to have a plan. Very early on, Justin's talking about it. He's also talked later on about, trying to weaponize his neurodivergence. He says, most anything that I have been, quote, accused of, and this was in June, before he was accused of anything, is social awkwardness and impulsive speech. And I think sitting down with him and looking at my brain. So he was very involved in it. There's also the part where I think he sends this text message, on the 15th of August, where, he's talking to Melissa Nathan, who is running the smear campaign and the social media manipulation campaign, talking about his partner, Steve, talked about flipping narrative to Ryan, saying that, Ryan said the script was a disaster and he saved the movie, claiming the female feminist writer didn't know how to tackle a female film and like really kind of go after him as being this misogynist. So here Justin's like deeply involved in the campaign and pushing for it. I will say, in his timeline, where are we? His timeline? Yeah, timeline, page 102. I will say the other issue is when they first talk about hiring the PR crisis phone, Jennifer Abel says she just got off the phone with X at Wayfarer and she was asking for our recs. We don't know who, but it's likely that it is probably somebody high up at Wayfarer. So it could well be Tara Hawks, the president, because she's in a lot of these email text message exchanges. So it's probably Tara Hawks. It could also, as we talked about before, be the VP of marketing. But Wayfarer themselves as an organization seem to recommend it. And then, we have when they send over the work that they can do on the 2nd, this is when Justin Baldoni responds specifically to the proposal of what they're going to do, where they talk about targeting Blake Lively. And he says, not in love with that document, not sure I feel the protection. And he wanted them to go harder. So it's very hard to say that he's not involved. All right, question. Do you think education about what sexual harassment is could help people understand the situation? Or do most people know what sexual harassment is? Do they think protections go too far? No, I think it could. I think it's very obvious from just my own experience as a people manager that, a lot of what is actual sexual harassment in the workplace is kind of brushed off as jokes. As men being men. It's not serious. Don't make a fuss of it. And I think a lot of those conversations in education would probably help when we come to cases like this, where I think a lot of people have said, look, they just pressured her to get naked. They just showed her naked videos. They were just talking openly about pornography. What else was there? They were just making comments about her being sexy. Those aren't sexual harassment. No, they are. They're all sexual harassment. And so I think, having those conversations might help, because I think a big chunk of some of the pushback, a lot of on this case has been, well, she hasn't proved sexual harassment. None of what she said is sexual harassment, which even if that was the case, her main case is about employment law and about Wayfarer failing to investigate claims of sexual harassment. It does not matter whether those sexual harassment claims turn out to be true or not. It's about, did they investigate them and did they retaliate for them? Even if you bring up a sexual harassment claim and they do investigate and it turns out you misunderstood, or it wasn't intended that way, or they don't agree that it reaches that level, or that any action needs to be taken. If you retaliate against that person for raising a complaint of sexual harassment, even if that sexual harassment isn't proved, that's still breaking employment law. And I think that's what a lot of people don't get about this case, is whether the sexual harassment actually happened or not isn't really relevant. It's about the retaliation. That is really where the strongest part of this case is, and the bulk of it is in that retaliation, because everybody seems to think that well, if she doesn't have, if she wasn't sexually harassed, she has no retaliation claim. No, she made complaints repeatedly. His own timeline accepts that they heard those complaints repeatedly. They just never did anything about it. So yeah, I definitely think having that education would help, though. What else we got? They're not counting suing Stephanie Jones. When do you think Jones's lawsuit will be settled? I don't know. I don't know how quick they're going to get through this. Given where we're at with things, and I think I'll talk more about this on Sunday, given the events of this week. I don't know, but I think we're looking pretty quickly. Because I don't think those cases are strong, and I think they probably want to get everything ironed out and get an actual actionable complaint from Wayfarer. What we got? One question: if it's true, did Justin hire Melissa Nathan? Did she also work for the Trump campaign? Did he just hire her for this reason? Is it true that Nathan worked for Trump? I know it's not political. Hold on to that, Reeves. I might answer that on Sunday. I remember somebody worked on the Trump campaign. I think it was Nathan. Yes, was Nathan. So Nathan, before she went for working for herself at TAG, worked for another company, and then yes, she'd worked on the Trump campaign. Okay. I remembered it because I'd started putting together a timeline a while back before I went on vacation. I need to get back to working on that timeline, and it was in the timeline because I remember talking about it. So yes, good point, Reeves. But I remember Trump got in trouble for sexual allegations. That's why I was asking. Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily connected. I think Nathan has worked for people who've had allegations against them and haven't. And as crisis PR, like, there's plenty of reasons why you're in crisis PR. But yeah. What could Blake have possibly gained from stealing this movie from this book series on an unproven box office? Colleen Hoover was right there. Yeah, and Colleen Hoover still backs Blake and wants nothing to do with Justin. So I think that should tell you everything as well. All right. I think Angela had one more question. Going to the Q&A. Have we seen a documentary source of this quote that Baldoni's lawyers are attributing to Lively? We haven't seen any documented evidence in their filings of Lively speaking negatively about anyone, just quotes with narrative like this. Have you seen anything? So this is in response to, I think, them saying, hey, if she didn't get the producer credit, that if they didn't give her the producer credit, any goodwill left has now gone. No, we haven't seen any documentation source for this. And there's a lot of this, and this is like my huge problem with Baldoni's complaint and his timeline. If you go look from the very beginning, the way that Blake Lively's complaint CRD was crafted: make a claim, show evidence, make a claim, show evidence, make a claim, show evidence. Baldoni's is make a claim, show a bunch of evidence that's not related to it, never back up your claim. And he does this a lot, talking about all of the extortion and the threats. There's not a single threat. There is over 600 pages of filing from him. Nowhere does Blake Lively say, do this or else I'll do this. Give me this or that. The one kind of threats that he's got in here are things like her 17 returns to protection to work. He's like, well, she threatened that she needed to get these or she wouldn't come back to work. No, she was putting a boundary of, if you want me to come back to work, these are the protections. You can take them or not do them. The premiere where he was forced to the basement and she was threatening to boycott if he showed up. Again, in his complaint, he talks about what happened was they told him that if he was there, Blake Lively would not be there. The entire cast told him that if he was there, they would not be there. And so they ended up working out a 2-theater separate solution so that the cast didn't boycott. That's not them threatening, that's them saying, you can send Justin all you want. We won't attend. So it's very different. Okay, I think that was everything here. But yeah, so I think that to me is like the big issue that I have with his document generally is it's very light on actual specifics for it. We'll get into that more on Sunday because his recent filings in the court have actually pointed out that he admits he doesn't have any evidence and he's waiting on discovery. So that's not a great thing to admit. All right, so we got any more questions, chat? Well, before we wrap this up, while I just wait, I will just, like I say, appreciate everybody for hanging out with us this week. It's been a lot of fun for me to kind of get all of this out. Marcy, did Blake and Ryan help finance the movie? I think I see finance second on top. I've seen that a couple of times that they did, and typically with the executive producer credit, there is usually like some financial aspect to it. We don't know, right? I don't know if Blake contributed financially. We might find out when we get to trial. We don't know right now. Justin is acting like a helpless victim of Blake's career ambition, basically. It really is Justin has a lot of power. Yeah, all of the power in this situation is in within Justin, Jamie, and Steve Sarowitz, right? Blake Lively's clearly unhappy with the work environment. She complains to them, they don't do anything. She complains to Sony, and Sony really don't do anything. They don't, there's no consequences or punishment for it. What ends up happening in November is that she gets all of these provisions added into her contract, and then she also gets two additional resources. Angie Giannetti from Sony, who's the representative from Sony that's working with Wayfarer, is now present on set every day. They hire an additional producer, Todd Black, to supervise safety on set. He's there every day. That's what she gets out of all of this. It's just extra people to like supervise safety. So yeah, and I think like towards the end, they're not even like talking to each other. I think April of 2024, it seems to be like when the last conversation between Baldoni and Blake Lively directly happens. Everything else after that is through Sony. So even if she did take over the movie, she's doing so with the permission and understanding and say so of Sony the whole way. So it's hard to see how she took that over. I do think it's interesting that there was this two-cut situation, that she gets a cut and his didn't. Again, we don't, I think, fully understand the reasons for it. And again, because largely Baldoni hasn't shown us those email exchanges, that hasn't shown the discussion that happens with Sony when Sony decide that they want to have a separate cut, when they're doing a separate cut, any of those things. He just shows that Lively's telling them what's happening. Do I think that Nice Pool is based on Justin? That's a good question. Do I think that Apple? I think it doesn't really matter, right? And I think a lot of people talked about this of like, well, if he's doing this and he made this mockery of Justin, then they clearly couldn't have been harassed because they're joking about it. And if you're harassed, you don't make those kind of jokes. And again, I think that just plays into this whole like kind of victim shaming narrative, victim blaming narrative, this perfect victim narrative. And I posted about this on Thread, like from my own personal experience. When I was going through a domestic violence situation, nobody like close to me had any idea of what was going on. So I don't think there's a particular way you need to behave. And I think them, even if it was directly at Justin and mocking through it, I don't think it invalidates any of their claims. And I also don't think Justin's got a case to go after them for it, because it's clearly protected under satire. I don't know what his lawyer thought he was doing. He's trying to say like, oh, Disney have to preserve all the materials and I'm going to go after Disney and they're going to be into, like, it's all grandstanding. That is never going to go anywhere from a legal standpoint. What do we think? Every decision he made gave more of his influence away. Oh God, I mean, like, okay, yeah, all right. Well, as we're wrapping up, that's the final thing that really aggravates me about his whole document. Oh gosh, his voicemail that he sent, the 2 a.m. voicemail where he's like, I want all of you and you need to be involved. You go through all of his text messages back and forth with her, and he's like, oh great, I really want all of your input, and and then he's turning around while he's telling them that he wants all of her input. He's turning around to everybody else and saying, screw her. Like, I'm so done with her. And so, yeah, I think that's something that I really, really don't like about all of this situation. It's just how two-faced everybody seems to be on the Wayfarer side, right? You've got Justin doing this. You've got Jamie Heath, praising her, and she should get the the PGA credit, and everything's great, and she's done so much work, and then turning around, sending an email internally to Wayfarer being like, we don't want to give her the PGA credit. Do we have that? in here. Oh, I'm not right here. I'm actually right here. Where, he's like, you know, is it this one? She's in a proposal. I can't remember. I think, does he keep it in here? I don't know. But yeah, the email he puts out, like praising her for her, situation, and then slagging her off afterwards. I'm like, oh, no. Yeah, the mess. I will say though, on the nice pool thing, I thought it was amusing, and I would love to show this image. The trainer that Baldoni had made the weight comment to, the one who talked openly about how that whatever conversation the two of them had was so egregious that the trainer cut off all communication with Justin as a result of that conversation. When Baldoni came out and did the whole nice pool thing, he posted to his Instagram stories, like quoting that story, that Justin Baldoni was like, oh, Disney and Marvel need to preserve all documents because Nice Pool is definitely me, putting in his story saying, so let me get this straight. There's a part in the movie where they make fun of someone who's clearly not a great person. This guy stands up and says, hey, it's me. I'm the crappy person. I love that. I will never not find that amusing. Because, yeah, I don't think anybody had put two and two together of that until they made a big noise about it and said, hey, that's me. That's him. All right. Well, like I say, with that, guys, just want to say how much I sincerely appreciate you guys hanging out with me this week to do all of this. Like I said, from now on, what we're probably going to do is like a regular weekly. I don't think it'll be on Sunday mornings every day, every week. I'm just putting that one up for this week. We'll figure out what a good regular time to do this is. But yeah, join me on Sunday. I'll put up the schedule for it right after this, so you can go get yourself notified and you can see when it's going to be. But we're going to do it on Sunday at 10 a.m. Central. And what I'm going to do is go over all of the documents from this week. So we're going to be talking about the protective order, the attorney's eyes only designation, what that means. Particularly, I'm going to cover like this whole idea that it was a big win for Blake or it was a big win for Justin. Like, what's the truth and reality of that? We'll also go over the letter that Leslie Sloan's lawyers filed, kind of supporting the motion to dismiss and that conversation that's going on. So we'll talk about that. And then anything else that you want and what comes up. All right. Appreciate you all. Again, like I said, thank you, chat, for hanging out today. Thank you for supporting this as we go through it. And I hopefully will look forward to seeing some of you on Sunday. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.